And welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm blessed to be joined by Dr. Stephen Barrows. He is Chief Operating Officer at the Acton Institute. And I greatly enjoy having conversations with him because in a lot of ways we're kindred spirits. We're men who share similar heartbeats for a lot of things. And this year, one of the things that's on your mind that you really want to share with has to do with the fertility decline and how it's greatly impacting, in general, I want to say Western civilization.
Yes.
It's a global problem, but in specificity, what's going on in the United States. So broad strokes, Stephen, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, thanks. I'm doing great, Marcus. It's great to have you back here at Acton University. Yes.
Well, it's always great to be here and to be able to bring to light the amazing things that are happening here. So this fertility decline problem, I might be jumping the gun when I say this, but I don't think I'm wrong. I think a lot of Christians and just the general American populace are not spending enough time thinking about what a problem this is going to be for our republic.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that this is true because demographic change oftentimes happens quite slowly,
Yes.
and that's just the nature of the case. And so you find that more and more now it's making the news for a variety of reasons. As you've alluded to, it's a great problem, not just for the United States, but the world as a whole. And I think that the more people realize the economic implications and, of course, underlying it a crisis of meaning,
Yes.
I think that people should become more aware. And you're hearing more and more headlines, particularly because the United States recently announced that it has, at least in their recent history, the lowest fertility rate that it's had. So it's
Is it 1.6 right now? Am I right?
I think it was 1.57. I think is a specific number, total fertility rate, and so that's a real challenge for a variety of reasons. We know that replacement level is estimated to be 2.1,
and that's the lowest level of replacement. Yeah.
Exactly, and so we're below that. And in fact, one of the things that struck economists is that the fertility rate took a dive during the Great Recession back in 2008. Typically, fertility is pro-cyclical, so when an economy recovers, fertility recovers. But that didn't happen after the Great Recession. It's never recovered above replacement, and so it's a concern for a lot of people.
Before I ask you to share your wisdom as to some of the reasons this is clearly happening, one of the things that I've been greatly concerned about, so you know this, I'm an immigrant from a nation that simply didn't have freedom of speech, and so moving here and having the blessings that we have in this nation, I understand what it means to say we have an American ethos,
Yes,
an American culture, and that is ingrained in the thought of our framers and in our founding documents.
yes.
With a fertility decline, can you please speak to how that's also going to run the risk of chipping away and probably corroding that sense of an American culture?
Yes. So I think there's several things underlying this. You know, when you take a look back in the early 20th century, there was also a fertility decline in the United States. It was concerning for folks. And back then, it generated a lot of questions about purpose and meaning of family. Mm-hmm. I think the same kinds of things are happening today, and that those who are aware of fertility decline recognize that there is something more existential, more transcendent behind the concerns. I think the challenge is when you start to create a culture where kin relations grow thin, it can create a self-reinforcing feedback loop. Maybe an illustration I could give you of where this happened to me. I was in China back, I think, 2017. I had my laptop open. I was at a college there. And the screensaver showed a picture of my family. I happen to have 5 children. They saw the 5 children. And each student that came up was just astonished. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, because in their society for over 40 years now, they cannot have concrete experience of brother and sister because of their one-child policy. And you can't avoid that affecting your imagination. Right. And so I think that that's one of the challenges, and culturally speaking, as we continue to see a decline in fertility, it's going to be difficult for people to conceive of what it means to have kin relations as they grow thinner.
I was just in Taiwan, I think about 2 months ago, spent about, I think, just about 2 weeks there. They don't have a hardline one-child policy, but they've embraced a one-child mentality.
Yes.
Exact same situation when they found out we have 3 with a 4th on the way.
Yes.
So like you said, it's not just individual imagination that gets formed a certain way. That collective individual imagination forms a social imagination.
Absolutely. And in fact, I have a book coming out with my wife next year from Word on Fire Press where we talk about this thing I call the fertile imagination. And so I think one of the things that we really need to be keeping an eye on is what is it that has caused this fertile imagination to dim? My contention is that much of it is a generation that happened over a generation ago with the population bomb scare.
Yeah.
This, coupled with a vigorous sex education movement and a technological revolution in the contraceptive pill, you find that over time people really were taught that we need to suppress our fertility, we need to suppress it and suppress it and suppress it. And then suddenly now the governments are turning around and saying, wait a second, now we want people to have babies, but they're still suppressing it. So
the tidal wave of all of the suppressive mechanisms are still in place, and it's going to be a long time before we can even reverse that.
Yes, absolutely, because it is a cultural change. It's going to have to reach into the hearts and minds of people because, as I said earlier, this is really about purpose and meaning in life. And of course, not everybody is called to have children. Not everybody is called to marriage. But for those who are called to that and who have been given the gift of being able to have children, the idea of just being open to children as the gift of life, because each person is a gift from God, is so important.
I couldn't agree more. And as the social imagination keeps going down these very modern secularist traits, it actually becomes harder for couples who are open to life to have children because the social structures in place to support that don't exist anymore.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, a colleague of mine here at Acton University, Tim Carney, has a book called Family Unfriendly.
Yep.
And much of his contention is that the culture itself has created structures that make it very difficult for us who have children or have larger families to be able to have the village and the neighbors that can support the kind of life that having a large family requires. And so it's not simply just the family itself, but it's our neighbors, it's our community, it's churches, it's others. And if we see those relationships grow thin, it just creates it more difficult to have children and bring them into the world.
I'm really glad you brought up that book because one of the things Tim highlights is that there was a point where all of those structures were taken for granted.
Yes.
And in some ways, I don't know, I wonder if our social imagination is still living off of that borrowed capital of that foregone time.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think that oftentimes we forget that much of our economic prosperity is a result of actually the baby boom generation coming into the workforce. As I like to say that our greatest resource, and this isn't from me, this is from Julian Simon, our greatest resource is the human person, right? And the ideas and entrepreneurial capacities that people bring in their own spheres of influence. And next thing you know, although people bring problems, people actually are solvers of the problems that we bring into the world. And so another quote from Julian Simon is if the human species did not have a capacity to produce more than it consumes, we would have perished as a species long ago.
Yep.
And so people need to get out of the scarcity mindset, whether it be in having children or what our future might look like. On the flip side, this is why fertility decline is such a concern, because you are actually allowing to atrophy the greatest resource God has given to humanity, which is the person itself.
I'm glad you're bringing up Julian Simon, and to the extent of her thought, how much of Julian Simon's thought, how much of Paul Ehrlich's thought has corrupted our society today?
Yes. So Julian Simon, he had an amazing debate with Paul Ehrlich back in the 1970s, where I think when he initially looked into the problem, Simon, who was an economist, thought that population growth was a concern. But when he actually looked at the data, he said, no, this is actually absurd.
Exactly, yeah.
And so he and Ehrlich got into a big debate. Now, I do think that
Didn't they have a wager?
They did. They had a wager where, from an economist standpoint, if you think that people are going to outstrip the scarcity of the earth, which is kind of a Malthusian concept, you would expect prices to rise. And so he challenged Ehrlich to a debate and actually won the debate that prices actually fell over a certain number of commodities. And so
it was like precious metals or something.
That's right. Yes, some core commodities. But you're right. Unfortunately, Paul Ehrlich, who just passed away earlier this year, his ideas, he always doubled down on his claims that population growth was going to be a menace. Now the argument shifted from widespread famine to damaging the environment. So that's where the new Malthusianism is showing up today, is we're going to just completely cause the rest of the planet to suffer. And I think that his ideas are still pervasive, especially in young people today, which is not to say that human beings aren't creating environmental problems. We do, and we need to address those problems, and human beings are certainly capable of solving those problems.
I'm talking with Dr. Stephen Barrows. He is Chief Operating Officer of the Acton Institute. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue this question of the fertility fertility decline. We want to talk about some of the reasonings behind it, but also why this is a crucial issue that the average American ought to be thinking about, and frankly, becoming part of the solution. And the solution really is strong marriages that create strong families that can rebuild strong societies, parishes, communities, and states, and then the nation. Continuing on the other side, stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. And welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with Dr. Stephen Barrows, Chief Operating Officer of the Acton Institute, and we're talking about the fertility decline and what's happening in, well, largely the entire civilized world. One of the things, okay, so I lived in Singapore for 2 years. They had a two-child policy. The propaganda from the government was if you have more, they will have less. Very Ehrlichian.
Yes.
In their, and Malthusian in their approach.
Right.
Well, this is what happened today. While I was living there, that policy was still in place. Today, I found out from my Singaporean friends that the government now has a new policy called Romancing Singapore.
Yes.
The incentive. So the government's trying to engineer desperately a baby boom to fix the problem.
Absolutely.
The problem they created.
Absolutely. As is China. China the same way. They moved it from a one-child policy to three-child policy. There was a 1-year bump when they removed the one-child policy, and it's been downhill ever since. They have half the number of births annually than they had under the one-child policy the last year of it. So, yes, you're right. And fertility decline, of course, is very complex. Lots of reasons why. I like to reduce it to something very simple, okay, and that is fertility decline means that people are either having sexual intercourse less frequently or the sexual intercourse they're having is less fertile, okay? So each of those things can be the result of choices that people are making or circumstances that people face, which is why it's so complex.
Yeah.
Because after all, not everybody who perhaps wants to marry finds a spouse, right? And probably about a quarter of fertility decline is explained by the decline of coupling. That is, people not coming together in marriage, which is a phenomenon that's not only occurring in terms of delayed marriage, but also just cohabitation is declining across the globe. We could have a long conversation about why that's the case, but those are circumstances that are oftentimes outside of people's control. And then for couples who are married and want to have children, sometimes they find themselves or discover that they're infertile or have recurrent miscarriages. And so it's not as simple as just people need to have more babies. And it's such a sensitive topic. My wife, in fact, is a physician that deals with this issue with people who struggle with recurrent miscarriage. So anyway, I think that's really important as we talk about the challenges that we face. There's a certain kind of sensitivity we need to bring to the discussion because of its complexity.
We mentioned Carney's book earlier. One of the things he points out is that, like I mentioned earlier, he shared that we had all these structures in place that we took for granted. We're trying to live off that borrowed capital. And one other thing we took for granted, Stephen, that I want to ask you to speak into is we had the structures in place to facilitate potential coupling.
Yes.
And we took for granted that that was something that had to be not engineered but worked towards.
For sure. Yes. So it's interesting. We do see, and I think there's a recent paper that came out from the National Bureau of Economic Research, and there was a previous paper the month before, both addressing the question, has the post-Great Recession fertility decline in the United States, is it partially attributed to the iPhone? And the research that they did, and I thought it was brilliant research, they capitalized on the fact that the iPhone was initially distributed only through AT&T's network, and they were able to isolate those where we had 90% plus saturation of AT&T's network and counties which had less than 10% saturation. They did what's called a difference in differences model. I won't get into the detail, but it was pretty brilliant. And they concluded, I think, anywhere from 35 to 50% of the fertility decline that's happened after the Great Recession is attributable to iPhones. Now, why would that be? Well, disembodied experiences, right?
Yes.
We engage in interactions now through our phones, especially young people, that are not creating the occasions for them to have embodied encounters. They meet people, they get to spontaneously discover people that they might like and potentially could become a future spouse. And that's really, I think, a great concern. How is our modern media, our modern technology affecting our ability to come together and couple? So it's, for sure a concern.
I think we take I keep bringing this up. We take these things for granted, and sometimes Hollywood does no service to this, right? Man and woman meet, fall in love at first sight and all that. But all of that necessitates a human-to-human encounter. It doesn't happen on a screen.
Absolutely, which is all the more reason why the things that we would naturally be concerned about, like pornography and the proliferation of it digitally, is also something that's going to disrupt those interactions that lead to fruitful marriages. And so whether it be, and I am fairly optimistic about sort of the upsides of artificial intelligence, but one of the areas where I do get concerned is how it could potentially exacerbate those relationships, right? If people start to become dependent upon their AI companion, right, as opposed to making genuine friendships, that also could exacerbate what the iPhone apparently did with deterring those opportunities for us to come together as couples and find a spouse.
Since you brought it up, there are a few, they're basically large language learning models that have been curated for the sake of building pseudo-relationships. One of the most famous ones is character.ai. I've been covering cases because a young man ended his life because of it.
Yes.
Again, broad strokes, I invite you to speak into that.
Yes. Well, like I say, as an economist, there's always trade-offs, and one of the downsides of artificial intelligence is that its ability through its algorithms and so forth for, I guess, capitalize on addictive behaviors. And, as human beings, we're messy. And so if you want to have friendships are going to also have their ups and downs. And if you end up approaching an artificial intelligence, avatar or what have you, next thing you know, it may be trained to tell you exactly what you want and then lead you down paths which end up in despair. Yeah. So that is something, I'm no expert on AI, but it's certainly something I keep my eye on as something to be wary of.
I'm glad you brought. I've been. I don't know. I guess I've become a bit of a commentator on the AI sphere. The bots, especially when you engage in the relational aspect with these bots, the model that they take is therapeutic validation at all costs.
Yes. Oh, I could see that.
Can you please speak to how that damages the desire even for a real interpersonal connection with a human person, because you won't receive constant therapeutic validation?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, human relationships are messy, and next thing you know, you'd find out that everybody has their flaws and their quirks, and you just recognize that everybody's unique. And so if you find this, algorithm that ends up creating all these affirmative things that make you think that you're the greatest thing it's ever been and so forth, well, you could suddenly find that other people just aren't quite up to your standards or what you're hoping to see for a companion. And so I think it's very dangerous. We don't want to immerse. In fact, we should never anthropomorphize artificial intelligence. Yep. Don't call it by a name. Just use it, it's simple to say, use it as a tool, but there's all sorts of protections that people should be using to protect themselves. So
now, conversely, like you've mentioned multiple times, now human relationships are messy. We're going to have conflict.
That's right.
We're going to make mistakes individually and with each other.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to have temperamental disagreements.
Yes.
But those are good things. Those are all inherent parts of the human experience in interpersonal connection.
Yes, absolutely. It's where we get to exercise those virtues that we're supposed to grow in holiness and love and mercy and forgiveness and patience and kindness and all those things that we all need to work on. As a father of 5, we have to learn patience with our children, and our children have to learn patience with us. Yeah. So, yes, for sure.
And also, just to be very fair, I thank God for the gift of my bride, because I would be insufferable without her.
Exactly. Oh, I can only imagine if I didn't meet my wife. We're 29 years of marriage now, and so if I hadn't met her, boy, I don't know where I would be. I'm very grateful that God has used her to help me in my own spiritual journey. Yes.
So as we go back to this question of the fertility decline, one of the things that the average American needs to start thinking about is a reformation of our imagination, which is tremendously crucial, because we're not just talking about economic sustainability here.
That's right.
We're talking about, souls that form a culture and a polis so that souls can live together.
Yes, absolutely. So, when I talk about a fertile imagination, a few of the kind of principles that I think we need to reinculcate in our hearts and minds and spread through society is, first of all, the human person is good, right? Yeah. That our human creative capacities are gifts from God, that human beings are from an economic perspective, net positives to people and to the planet. We also need to remember the true nature of an integral human ecology, as popes have spoken of, that yes, the way we treat nature is connected to the way we treat our own bodies. And this is why it's so important to remind ourselves that it's not healthy to systematically suppress any bodily function, right? to include our reproductive capacities, right? So God has given us this gift that enables us to bring the next generation into the world. And unfortunately, we've been told from the medical community to with the population control movement to sex education that this is something we need to suppress.
Yep.
And that, of course, destroys a fertile imagination. So we need to reimagine that this is a gift, that every human being is a gift, that everything's connected, and to be open to life.
And that there's a certain sacredness to the reproductive capacities of the person.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, the debates that occurred even in the early 20th century when should we spread contraceptive information and overturn the old Comstock laws, as they were called? Well, back then the big debate was, well, do I have any transcendent obligation if I'm married to bring new life into the world? And there were people back then who thought it was absurd to even ask the question, which is understandable because we had such a Christian mentality back then that it just was a natural part of life. Married couples come together and they bring children into the world. So it's interesting that we even have those debates because at one point that wasn't even a debate. As one person put it, the most fundamental change about children, is that children have now become a choice. That's the underlying fundamental change. Before, the choice was marriage, right? Which then entailed children. Now it's like marriage, and by the way, some people say you can marry and then just decide whether or not you want to have children or not. Well, that's a fundamental transformation that we need to steer away from. Go back to the old.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, this was the great contention of the Lambeth Conference.
Yes.
They were afraid of violating the moral accountability to the transcendent God.
Yes, absolutely. So that Anglican decision that suddenly said it was acceptable to use contraception,
that
which
broke the dam.
It did break the dam. And I forget whether it was Lambeth or next year, the Federal Council of Churches, one of them had declared they did not think that the result of approving contraception would mean that people would use it indiscriminately. They thought it would be rare.
Oh, that was the conference, yeah.
Yes, I think it was the FCC conference the next year.
Yep.
And of course, has there ever been a more dramatically wrong prediction, right? Now people are considered to be odd birds if they'd never used contraception.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty sad where we are today. But if we remember the purpose and meaning of our bodies, we'll remember that God has given the gift of life for a reason. And for those who are called to marriage, life is a great gift. And
Oh, way to end on a beautiful note of hope. My guest has been Dr. Stephen Barrows. He's Chief Operating Officer of the Acton Institute. We've been talking about the fertility decline and how, as Stephen has rightly pointed out, the solution here is submitting our lives, our bodies, and our fertility to the accountability before Almighty God. He alone can be the remedy for all of this. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.